And joining us right now from the Daily Beast, he's Eli Lake. He's the senior national security correspondent. Hey there, Eli Lake. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, it's a busy time for you, Eli, so we appreciate you joining us. And, it looked like on July 3rd, we saw what appeared to be, for all intents and purposes, a military coup in Egypt, but it looks like the United States government is not willing to call it that. What exactly was it if it wasn't a military coup?
I think by plain English purposes, you'd call it a military coup, although unlike other military coups, such as prior Egyptian military coups, the military did not install a military leader, although at this point you'd have to conclude that the military really is the power broker in Egypt. And even and they've committed to elections, but even if they have those elections, this event will obviously shape the dynamics and the relationship between the civilian government and the military. So I think that most people are going to call it a coup, but if the U.S. government says it's a coup, then that means that the $1.3 billion annually in aid that the United States has provided to the Egyptian military since the Camp David Accords in 1979 has to be suspended because there are laws against providing aid to military to overthrow elected government.
Doesn't most of that money go to the Egyptian military, in fact?
It does. That's the $1.3 billion. There's a separate aid package that was meant just to sort of support the civilian government and to do economic development. But, you know, in some ways, this is an example of America's declining influence in the region. Political scientists would say that Egypt, for years after the Camp David Accords, was a client state of the United States because the U.S. trained, provided spare parts for the military, and a major subsidy. The U.S. asked the military not to go forward with a coup. It also asked Morsi, the deposed elected president affiliated with Muslim Brotherhood, to agree to some conciliatory measures, including a more sped-up process for the election. And both sides spurned the United States. And both sides are now blaming the United States, I might add.
Yeah, and well, listen, you say that this is a sign of America's declining influence there. I mean, how does this play out at this point, Eli Lake? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of strong action or even statement coming from the United States.
Well, ideally, from the U.S. perspective, and I think the perspective of people who want to see stability in the Middle East, there'll be another election. There will be a new government. The Muslim Brotherhood will reluctantly agree to participate in the new government, though that seems somewhat doubtful. And Egypt will continue the rocky transition, hopefully, towards something that looks more like an open society or democracy. But at this point, I think that it's unclear how it's going to play out. There has been horrific violence today. In Cairo, we're starting to see YouTube videos of both sides engaging in awful kinds of violence, and it's looking like the lack of security that was a hallmark of Egypt in the months after the election has never really been remedied. And it's the kind of place that I think you're going to start to see the most talented Egyptians trying to flee the country. Certainly, religious minorities like Coptic Christians are going to begin leaving the country, and it's going to be pretty disastrous for probably the most important country in the Arab world, certainly the seat of the Arab League.
All right, so we don't want to seem insensitive, given the fact that the Secretary of State's wife is in the hospital and apparently in critical condition. We're not real clear on what's going on there. But, I mean, while all of this was going on, we got the president going out and playing golf. There is a meeting later, and the Secretary of State is not present. We later find out that he spent at least some time, on his yacht. A lot of people always say, well, look, these guys are always on duty, et cetera, but it didn't look very good, did it?
I don't think it looked very good. I will say this, and I'm not trying to this is not an excuse or anything for Secretary Kerry, but most of the policy and diplomacy in Egypt, more so than other countries, is really done by Ann Patterson, the U.S. ambassador in Cairo. That's one of the reasons why her face was on the protesters against Morsi, earlier this month, along with President Obama, because she really is driving the policy. She is the main diplomat there. And in that respect, obviously, Ann Patterson appears to be very much engaged in all of this. But Ann Patterson is the person who was spurned by the president of Egypt, who was just deposed, as well as the military.
Eli Lake is our guest. He's the national security correspondent for Newsweek magazine and the Daily Beast. And Eli Lake, can we get back to the Muslim Brotherhood just for a second? Because for the most part, they've been, they haven't really operated in the political realm in Egypt very much up until recently. They've sort of been in the shadows and working in the background. Here they came out. They became part of the political process as soon as they had their first real democratic election. They backed a candidate. That candidate won. And here a year later, they've been deposed. Does this potentially put the Muslim Brotherhood in a place where they're going to spurn the democratic and political process and actually go back towards some of the more nefarious actions that they're accused of?
Well, that's to be determined, but in that narrative about the Muslim Brotherhood, participating in the elections, saying all the right things, spending 2 generations trying to build their credibility among civil society, and then Morsi comes to power and acts very much like majoritarian, almost at times tyrant. That's at least what his critics would say. I mean, he didn't try to reach out to other groups and build a strong or wide coalition. He tried to basically roll the entire constitution writing process so that that process was stacked only with his kind of ideological allies. And from the perspective of a lot of Egyptian liberals, this was the chance to stop Morsi before he became the Muslim Brotherhood Mubarak. So in that respect, I think that the Muslim Brotherhood kind of proved that, the critics or the skeptics of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is that they would only use the democratic process to consolidate power. They were not really interested in a second, third, and fourth election once they got power.
Very quickly, Snowden, he's still in Russia. The Russians seem to be saying, well, that offer from Venezuela, maybe you should take that. Any thoughts?
Well, how does he get from Moscow to Caracas or Moscow to La Paz, because I think the Bolivians have also now formally offered him asylum, without a passport? And what exactly is Putin's plan in all of this? Like, what's he playing? I mean, he's claiming that he's in the airport, and the airport is not technically Russian territory. I mean, that's delightful. That's hilarious.
Yeah, all right. All right, we're going to leave it right there. Thanks, Eli.
Hey, Eli, always great to hear from you. Thanks.
Hey, great to hear from you. Check out Yeezus, the new Kanye record. It's great.
Always throwing in the hip-hop there. Yeah. Eli is too cool for me.
He's a cutting edge.